All right. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jessie Servi-Ortiz. I'm the Executive Director of the Sustainable Business Council. I'm actually really looking forward to this webinar today because it's kind of a hot topic. So we're talking about sort of the regulatory landscape and how that's been shifting and how it's affecting reporting needs for businesses. Before we jump in, I'm going to just share a little bit about Sustainable Business Council for those of you who might be new. For nearly 20 years, we've been a trusted partner to a variety of businesses, primarily in Wisconsin, with operations or headquarters here, guiding them through their journey of sustainability. Our mission is to accelerate the adoption of sustainability by integrating it into business strategies and operations, driving long-term impact. And so we primarily do this through membership, which we help businesses educate, measure, and improve their outcomes and facilitate connection amongst those working on sustainability. And another key sort of pillar of what we do is help build sustainability leaders. So membership is one bucket. We also have Krista Kanan in here today who does our consulting services, and it just wanted to remind folks that that we do offer consulting services. I've been doing some empathy interviews as of late, and it seems that many of our members don't even know that we offer these services, particularly around greenhouse gas inventory and assurance. So I just wanted to remind you all that if you need particular help or assistance in any way in sustainability, please feel free to reach out. And if we're not the right partner, we're kind of working on a trusted partner program that will help you find the right folks that can help you. So I'm just going to pause and ask if you are not currently muted to please mute yourselves. Sorry, with Teams, I don't always have the easy ability to go quick mute you. So thank you. All right, and I just want to share about some upcoming events to make sure they are on your radar if you're interested in joining us. A recent and next in-person event is actually happening at EUA in Milwaukee. And this is an event where we're bringing together a panel to talk about kind of the trials and tribulations of carbon accounting, both in businesses and buildings, and how a lot of that back end is similar, but then the application of it can be different, and the different tools and resources for applying it to buildings, operations, and products. And then we also get to be at the beautiful EUA terrace. So if you want to come check out that space and you're near Milwaukee, it's in the afternoon, so meant to be kind of a casual and social gathering. That's on May 22nd. We also have virtual networking coming up, our quarterly kind of open Q&A session. And then USGBC is also offering a kind of decarbonizing the built environment event on June 12th. So I will be there and hopefully can see some of you in person coming up. You can find all that information on the SBC calendar, which I'll drop in the chat at some point. And you've probably seen the emails, but if you haven't, please mark your calendar for November 5th. We are hosting our annual conference in La Crosse this year. Very excited to be going to La Crosse to showcase all the great work that's happening in that region, in the upper Midwest, on the river, and then some. So we have a call for proposals out right now, due the beginning of June. If you're interested in speaking or have an idea, please see that information on our website or just reach out to me directly to talk through your idea. Yeah, we're looking for all kinds of sustainability related content. And then last but not least, before I introduce our speakers, I need to send a shout out to our great sponsors. We have a host of annual sponsors, and with each webinar, I get to draw out a few of them. Particularly today, I'm celebrating Mercury Marine, Reynolds Transfer and Storage, and Sun Peak Solar. So thank you to these sponsors who help make our work possible. And now I'm going to introduce our speakers and then hand it over to them. So first with us today, we have Tess, who is a sustainability disclosure intern with us at SBC. I said part of our mission was helping build sustainability leaders, and this is a great example of that. She did some great work on the Green Masters program and helping with some resources for us this year, and she's going to share about some of the research that she did. Also with us today, we have Judah, who's an environmental attorney for Foley and Lardner. He's going to share about the regulations and what's sort of shifting with the Trump administration and their current priorities. And then Jennifer, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Brunswick Corporation, is going to share about sort of the reporting landscape and how businesses are responding to the changes in rules and regulations in this current administration. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Tess, who's first to kind of share her findings. So Tess.
Can you hear me?
Yep, great. I can hear you.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect. Okay, so I'm Tess, and as Jesse mentioned, I'm a sustainability disclosure intern at SBC, along with a recent graduate from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And today I'll be talking about the rapidly changing world of climate-related disclosures and regulations in the United States, focusing specifically on recent shifts from the SEC and major legislation from California. And then I'll also look ahead at what this means for companies moving forward. Starting off with the SEC, they previously required registrants to disclose climate-related risks that had or could have a material impact on their business. And this included both actual and potential impacts and any mitigation or adaptation efforts. But recently, the Commission took a significant turn, aiming to, quote, seize its involvement in the defense of these disclosure rules, end quote, calling them costly and unnecessarily intrusive. And this signals a shift away from federal leadership on this issue, at least for now. In contrast, California has stepped up with some of the strictest climate disclosure laws in the country. Specifically, there's SB 253, which targets companies with over $1 billion in global revenue. They must publicly report their Scope 1 and 2 emissions, with Scope 3 following within 180 days, all in line with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol standards. There's also SB 261, which applies to entities with at least $500 million in revenue. And this mandates a climate-related financial risk report aligned with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Finally, there's AB 1305, which takes it a step further with no revenue threshold. And this requires transparency around carbon offsets and associated greenhouse gas emissions. There's also the California Air Resources Board, CARB, which has some new and expanding regulations for 2025, which mostly pertain to truck manufacturers. There's the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation, which mandates that truck manufacturers increase the sales of zero-emission vehicles, starting with the 2024 model year. And there's the Clean Truck Check Program, which ensures that heavy-duty vehicles operating in California maintain properly functioning emissions control systems. And this involves periodic emissions compliance testing and reporting for vehicles. And this is applicable to both in-state and out-of-state vehicles. Together, these California laws set a high bar for transparency and accountability. And then I also conducted interviews with different business leaders, and this is what they had to say about the future of climate reporting. When asked if they foresee these regulations making a true impact on emissions levels and climate change, they responded with, in the long term, yes, but initially no, that regulations pushed out take longer, that consumer pressure makes companies report, and that it is not clear that disclosure requirements alone will make a difference. I also asked about what the future of climate reporting and regulation looks like for companies, and they answered that regulations will hopefully eliminate greenwashing. Some federal entities will continue to put laws in place, but none will be exactly the same. And that voluntary or customer-driven disclosure will continue, and ultimately companies will support a clear legal standard to avoid the complexity of having to conform to multiple different standards driven by different stakeholder groups. So while the SEC stepped back, California is moving forward. Whether these efforts succeed will depend on how seriously businesses respond and how much pressure they feel from consumers and other stakeholders. Thank you. And next, Judah will be talking about environmental policy during Trump's second term.
Thanks, Tess. So I'm Judah Lieblich. I'm an environmental attorney at Foley and Lardner, and I'm going to be talking about environmental policy in Trump's second term, what some of the indicators were of what that policy would be, how it's shaped up, and what changes have been made so far. In his first term, the Trump admin slashed regulations. They cut EPA funding and personnel, and they also appointed a lot of conservative judges, which went on to make decisions that, in some cases, gutted environmental statutes, like the Clean Water Act, or else changed the interpretation of statutes that would otherwise protect environmental regulations. Environmental policy was not really a focal point of Trump's 2024 campaign. He'd made statements about boosting fossil fuels, reducing regulations that impede economic growth, and improving the auto manufacturing, onshoring process and the industry generally in the US. But in terms of specific goals with regard to environmental protection or climate change, there weren't many clear indicators. So it's useful particularly to look at Project 2025. This was a political initiative launched by the Heritage Foundation in April 2023. It set out a 900-page document, which included a lot of chapters, some specifically targeted at the EPA and some at other agencies that involve environmental protection, like the Department of Energy. In his first term, Trump adopted 2/3 of Heritage Foundation proposals, so it was safe to say from the outset that it looked quite clear that this would be read and considered by a lot of key players in the second Trump admin. Since then, a lot of key appointments have been made, which furthers this theory. Brendan Carr, who authored the FCC chapter of Project 2025, was chosen to be the FCC chairman. Russell Vought, author of the Executive Office of the President chapter, is heading the OMB, which is a very, very powerful office within the White House. And Tom Homan, who was a key Project 2025 contributor, was chosen to be board czar. So I'm going to refer to Project 2025 throughout in terms of the indicators and what has actually come about. But also keep in mind, we're still in the first few months of the Trump admin. So a lot of the stuff that was indicated or suggested might happen is still yet to occur. If we move now to Lee Zeldin, who's been appointed as the head of the EPA, he wasn't involved in Project 2025. He's a former New York Republican congressman representing Long Island. His record is pretty sparse on environmental matters specifically. He hasn't served in any environmental administrations or worked in this area before. He did support PFAS drinking water standards, and I'll refer to that a little bit later because he's leaning back on that with the EPA's new PFAS strategy. He supported the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. He has previously referred to climate change as an important issue and highlighted his work in protecting drinking water on Long Island. But his policies have been supporting boosting energy production and the domestic auto industry, which are closely aligned with Trump's goals. And he's previously written op-eds criticizing climate policies before. So Project 2025 outlined a number of day one actions that would be taken initially. Just on the next slide there, they're kind of outlined. A lot of those fit within these broader policy aims that I mentioned. In terms of reducing the EPA's costs and staffing, there was a lot of call on increasingly relying on states for environmental enforcement and regulation rather than on federal enforcement. And then there were Trump's campaign statements, which also ended up being realized in day one executive orders where he stated that he would end electric vehicle mandates and use his authority to drill. So there were executive orders like the one declaring an energy emergency and focusing efforts on boosting fossil fuel production. So those sorts of broad policy aims have, in the past few months, we've seen them coalesce into specific areas. The first one would be deregulation, which was referenced throughout Project 2025 documents. It was also referenced in the Trump campaign. In his first term, he rolled back over 100 environmental rules, and there are indications that he plans to do the same. One possible wrinkle on this is the removal of Chevron deference in the Loper Bright Supreme Court case last year. So the initial outcry from the environmentalist and sort of ESG sustainability community was that this was a negative thing because Chevron deference protected the EPA's regulations and specifically their interpretation of their own regulations and legislation. And generally, the EPA is tasked with protecting the environment, and that's definitely 80% of the time the truth. But I would say that removal of Chevron deference will also cut both ways, with the Trump administration seeking to remove regulations and deregulate. There's going to be capacity for legal challenges to those efforts. They're going to have to justify in court the revision or repeal of rules, argue that the rules they want repealed are based on an incorrect interpretation of the statute or are otherwise unlawful. It's hard to say whether this is going to be some kind of incredible shield for environmental regulations and sustainability rules. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, but there's definitely still a lot of capacity for legally challenging deregulation. In terms of removing climate rules, that's a bit of a harder task. Trump has said he wants to get rid of all climate rules. Many of the Biden admin's climate regulations or rules were passed by executive order. So a lot of those have already been removed, and a lot of the officers that do them have had their grants revoked or have had people fired. So it's difficult to see what of the Biden administration's climate efforts are going to remain in a year or two. And then lastly, refocusing on fossil fuels. One of the first things we saw the Trump administration do was pull out again from the Paris Accords. There's been executive orders boosting the coal industry. The pause on natural gas export terminals have been lifted, and then there's also been talk about opening public lands to oil and gas exploration. So as we see those three broad policy aims, we can move forward into the Trump EPA's declaration of 5 pillars, which occurred in February 2025. So some of these aren't too scandalous, but some are kind of a head scratcher. So if you take pillar 1, for example, on its face, it doesn't seem to be anything strange about that. EPA has been focused on clean air and water and land since its inception in the 70s. So that shouldn't be controversial. But I think that the operative wording here is for every American. During the Biden administration, there was a big focus on environmental justice programs, which focus on relieving overburdened communities. We've seen in the past, historically, a very strong trend for placing environmentally degrading or polluting industries in low-income and minority populations. And environmental justice programs were focused on undoing that. As an extension of the Trump admin's anti-DEI policies, they've been removing environmental justice programs and firing environmental justice workers in the EPA. We've seen 168 employees fired from the Environmental Justice Office, elimination of any office or position involving environmental justice, rescission of the Biden administration's environmental justice executive orders, and also removal of the climate and economic justice screening tool, which some on this call may have even used. I used it a lot in order to determine what the impact of new development would be. We've also seen environmental justice grants cancelled. Pillar 2, that's been supported by executive orders like the one declaring a national emergency, energy emergency, which calls for an expansion of fossil fuels, but despite there being an emergency, neglecting to give any special focus or support for renewable energy, and also the executive order about unleashing American energy. those reversed Biden administration actions that limited the export of LNG and promoted electric vehicles. Pillar 3, again, this has been something which has been a focus of the EPA broadly for a long time, but in his first term, the Trump admin had a goal of permitting reform. So I would expect to see movement on this third pillar to be manifested in changes to NEPA and its regulations, so impacting companies that are undergoing developments. But again, that can cut both ways in easing the process of having renewable energy or other green developments fast-tracked. Pillar 4, AI doesn't seem to directly relate to the core mission of the EPA, but I think that the focus here is the importance of electricity to the AI industry and data centers specifically. So again, that circles back to energy and boosting fossil fuel production. Pillar 5 seems to combine permitting reform and the rollback of EPA decisions about vehicle emissions, and also about stopping the disbursement of Inflation Reduction Acts for electric vehicles and Inflation Reduction Act funds for electric vehicles and charging stations. Just taking a quick look at enforcement now. This graph is taken from the Environmental Integrity Project, the one on the next slide, tracking EPA enforcement actions since 2001. As you can see here, there's a broad trend of a reduction in enforcement actions, which probably goes above any change from administration to administration or political party to political party. But beyond that, you do see a drop after the first Trump administration took over from the Obama administration, and then a slight recovery under Biden. The drop is likely more a product of funding and staffing impacts in the EPA rather than policy changes necessarily. But we would expect for a continuation of this trend where we see another drop at the start of Trump's second admin, particularly because we've seen beyond the staffing and funding changes and the policy changes, there's also a prioritization of cooperation with the regulated community and a focus on compliance rather than enforcement. And that's mentioned throughout Project 2025 as well. Moving on to inspections. Again, we're not expecting to see a massive drop. I was quite surprised when I first saw this to see that there wasn't a huge drop from the Obama admin to the Trump admin. The biggest drop clear on that graph is obviously due to COVID. And then just another note here that we would expect civil penalties per violation to drop as well. We saw them drop from $242 per violation under Obama to $169 under Trump. And they then went back up under Biden to $239. So basically to the Obama admin levels. And I would expect that to drop again. On the PFAS and RCRA slide, just two issues here. PFAS gets probably more press coverage, RCRA not so much. So I'll try to touch on both. In Project 2025, there was a call to revisit the designation of PFAS as a hazardous substance under CERCLA, which was quite a large change, probably along with the drinking water rule, the biggest change in this area. Obviously, PFAS are everywhere, and their ubiquity makes them very difficult to regulate. So seeing them included as a hazardous substance under CERCLA and brought into the fold of that statutory area was quite a big change. There was concerns because Project 2025 called for revisiting it, that the Trump admin would reverse course. At his confirmation hearing, Lee Zeldin said he was previously working on the PFAS task force and that he wants to continue to work on this. He highlighted his work and support for drinking water limitations on PFAS. And then in April, towards the end of April, actually, there was a statement made stating by Administrator Zeldin that we are tackling PFAS from all the EPA's program offices, advancing research and testing, stopping PFAS from getting into drinking water, and holding polluters accountable. This is not language that I would think is consistent with reversing course completely. And there was not a complete reversal of course under the Trump's first admin either. So I wouldn't think that there's going to be a big change, although it's still hard to tell. And the EPA has recently announced that they have goals which include things like enforcing the Clean Water Act and TSCA limitations on PFAS use and release. So it wouldn't seem like there's going to be a massive change in this area, although that was considered quite a big possibility up until very recently. With RCRA, RCRA is kind of a funny one because RCRA relates to disposal and occasionally recycling and reuse of hazardous waste and other forms of waste. But Project 2025 specifically considered modifying these regulations to improve resource efficiency and remove regulations that impede recycling and reuse. So this could be an area where we see actually a boost in the recycling industry from the Trump admin. And we could see things like the promulgation of a rule that provides alternative pathways to hazardous waste regulations, or that loosens up the speculative accumulation rules. But there hasn't been any movement on this yet. So moving through to ESG, Trump has been a very vocal detractor from ESG investing. We know that under his first term, there was a big bump in involuntary increased sustainability reporting and a big bump in ESG conscious investing. During his first term, agencies like the Department of Labor issued guidance discouraging ESG investing. And then during the Biden admin, Trump's team made a lot of statements against ESG. In a video on his campaign website, he said that he would ban ESG investments through executive order and work with Congress to enact a permanent ban. It wasn't clear whether this was referring to the investment of federal money, or if it was a reference to the Department of Labor under Biden providing for an ERISA fiduciary's assessment of an investment's potential risks or returns, saying that that could include ESG factors. And we haven't seen too much movement in that area yet, apart from a few statements. And then, of course, we saw the SEC, as Tess referred to, backing off, and then in March saying that they would no longer defend the climate risk disclosure rule in court. Beyond that, this is still very much a watch this space area. But more broadly speaking, we've seen a cultural shift since Trump's election, with companies avoiding or stepping back from their commitments. And I would expect that generally to continue. On that, we're seeing more of a global trend in this area as well. In January, we saw the VP of the EU stating that they would eliminate, or that could have been a mistranslation, non-financial reporting, which was thought to refer to ESG reporting, specifically the CSRD requirements. Subsequent statements walked this back, and now that the omnibus package has been released, it seems like what this was referring to was a stop the clock directive, which is 2025-794. That postpones CSRD reporting generally by around 2 years, although it depends on company size and classifications under the EU's rules. It also postpones CS3D reporting until 2028, but again, that depends on classification under those statutes. We also saw in Canada on April 23rd, the CSA announced that they'd paused efforts to develop a new mandatory climate-related disclosure rule for Canadian issuers. I felt that these changes were part of the overall cultural trend. After Trump's election, I read a lot of articles and I found quite persuasive the argument that his election was part of a conservative shift in society globally. We saw a few right-wing parties get more power in European elections, particularly we saw in Germany and France even. And then obviously there was Trump's election as well. And then we saw companies walking back their ESG commitments. And it did seem that this was part of a broad cultural trend. I still think that that is the case, but there's a few more recent things that have happened that show that it's not quite such a clear-cut narrative. We saw just this month in Australia, the centre-left party won the election in a landslide victory, and they are generally seen as being more environmentally responsible and placing a more importance on environmental stewardship. And then we saw in Canada in March, the Liberal Party won after Justin Trudeau stepped back. And that also signaled a shift away from conservative policies, and particularly considering the importance of the carbon tax and carbon legislation in Canada, and the shift, the kind of discourse between Alberta on one hand and the rest of Canada on the other. I thought that that was quite important. It does show that we can't just simply assume that the narrative is in any single direction. I think that things are going to continue to change. Right now, just to finish up, we're seeing the environmental and sustainability movements and the political left, including the Democrats, undergoing a lot of soul searching and trying to see where they fit in and what a winning strategy will be. We're seeing I've seen arguments, if anyone on the call has read Abundance by Ezra Klein. We've seen a lot of arguments for perhaps stepping back from some environmental regulations in order to ease the flow and to ease the passage of what will overall be a better environmentally sensitive development, for example, to ease permitting restrictions for renewable energy and big transportation projects. So I do think that we're in a big period of change now, but I don't think it's just going to be in any one direction. We really need to give it a few months and possibly years to see how the chips fall.
Thanks so much, Judah. So much good insight and information there. We did have a couple questions I thought I would just have you speak to now before moving on. One has to do with the EPA's Energy Star program, right? And that was recent news of cutting funds or shutting down, kind of sunsetting that program. Any thoughts or reactions to that you know about, or the effect that would maybe have on the business community?
I think this is, I mean, there's no doubt that the funds will be cut, even if it's being challenged in court right now. And whether or not the program is removed entirely or it just takes on a different form, I think is still up in the air. But I think that it's really for a company by company assessment. You need to look at the reliance on that, and maybe it's a chat we have offline. But I think it's going to depend on what the reliance is and what the sensitivity to changes there, because whether or not those changes have gone through and will stand up to legal scrutiny is kind of one thing, but the other thing is that without a doubt the Trump administration has signaled their stance on this matter, and any decisions they can take that they have the legal ability to take, they will take in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, thanks for that. Efficiency just seems to be one of those things that you would think would be supported, right? So, like you said, we'll have to kind of see how it would shake out. Yeah. Especially with the increase of energy demand and wanting to bring energy home. So
but like we saw with the executive order, which said that there was an energy emergency, but then didn't mention or support renewable energy growth. Like it's not always consistent. The Trump admin never had clear-cut goals for how they would deal with these environmental issues. They just had these sorts of policies and statements, and then they've coalesced around those. It's very much dealing with the decision making as each decision comes up, just based on how it fits within that narrative.
Okay, thanks. And then there's another question here from Aaron that says, the House of Representative Ways and Means Committee just announced last night a draft of a reconciliation bill that may reverse a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act, especially around EV tax credits and clean energy production. Since that is federal law, wondering how the committee would be able to walk back major parts of an established law unless it's all budgetary levers that they are looking to impact. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the IRA, I mean, that could be a presentation on its own. The committee, I guess the short answer is that the committee doesn't have the power to do that on their own, but they have the power to recommend it and for it to pass that stage of voting and move on to the next stage. So that vote hasn't happened yet, and while that's been announced, that's kind of like the starting gun for the negotiations and the arguing and the lobbying to begin. A lot of people in the renewable energy community, certainly certainly at my firm, we've known that this has been a long time coming. But now that kind of the gauntlet has been thrown down, and we've seen what the first round of changes suggested to the IRA are, now is the time. Now really is the time to step up lobbying efforts and argue in favor of tax credits and grants, whatever it is that your company relies on in that area. I mean, I think that so many of the changes brought by the IRA have been critical, and when the IRA was first passed, it felt like we had been waiting for that for so long. The thought of it going away, I think, is really, it's really difficult to come to terms with, but I also think it's quite unlikely. I think that this is something which is going to change. A lot of Republican states have benefited from this, and a lot of Republican reps have benefited from it.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for all of this. And I'm just really briefly looking, but I think Corinne is putting some potential action steps in how your business can have a positive voice in promoting Energy Star as a program that you want to support. So I can share information out about that after. I know the American Sustainable Business Council has something. I know USGBC has something. So yeah, as Judah just said, now is the time to make your voice heard. So thank you for all that great information. We'll transition now to Jennifer to talk about, how is the business community responding to all of this, and particularly sort of through the lens of reporting and what they're putting out into the world and publishing. So Jennifer.
Thank you, Jesse. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Koenig. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for Brunswick Corporation, based in Mattawa, Illinois. Brunswick is the leading recreational marine manufacturer in the United States. So we do have Mercury Marine in our family, one of the sponsors today. And we also have a line of some of the world's most famous boats like Boston Whaler, Sea Ray, Lund, and Lowe. Thank you for having me today. I thought after hearing the comments before about what's taking place in the party, it's important to get grounded in this quote that was just recently in Harvard Business Review, that when we're transitioning from one sustainability regime to another, we should not expect an orderly, predictable trajectory, but rather a complex and confusing period of time. And I think that certainly sums up where we are today. And so I wanted to just spend a little bit of time looking at, like, where do we stand, and then where do we think this is going, or what can we do now as sustainability leaders? So if we look back even at, like, where were we at the end of 2024 in terms of sustainability reporting, it really has, and not surprising to everyone on the call, it really has become mainstream to do sustainability reporting. You can see some of the stats here. In 2024, 93% of Russell 1000 companies published a report. 60% of those still Russell 1000 followed an existing framework like a TCFD. There were, and this is still Russell 1000, 48% have some sort of external assurance. So we've got, a group of people really trying to make sure their data is accurate, transparent, reliable. And then just as a fun fact, it's interesting to note that 83 pages is the average size of a sustainability report. That's for S&P 500 companies, but that's a pretty impressive commitment if you're putting out on an annual basis about 83 pages or 80 pages talking about your different sustainability activities. So it really has become mainstream, even though the SEC has pulled back on this. I don't know that I believe sustainability reports are going to go away. They've become such a staple for telling various parts of your story, whether it's your environmental commitment, conservation, what you're doing to establish employee engagement in your company. It's just really become an important tool for a wide range of stakeholders. So I do anticipate that will continue. But if we think about why should we continue to focus on sustainability in this state of transition? I wanted to highlight this survey, which was done by BDO. BDO is an accountancy and advisory firm. They're fairly large. And they did a survey after the November election asking CFOs what are their perspectives on the benefits of focusing on sustainability. And you can really see that from this results that it really has to do with growing value in the business. So whether it's new business opportunities, new revenue, getting access to finance, risk management, an important one. They're focused on this not because it's the right thing to do, not because there's a mandate to do something, but really because there's business value to be had. And specifically, if we look at the next slide, some of the areas of value that get focused on are really, I'm assuming most of us on this call are in the manufacturing area. I don't know that for sure, but you can look at it's things like cost reduction, material use and efficiency, which also has a cost benefit generally, and sustainable product development. Sustainable product development also is a new source of revenue. So these three themes are really about how businesses leverage sustainability to create value, to increase revenue, to reduce costs. And that is, I think, a foundational element of what we've been doing with sustainability, in addition to meeting some of these reporting requirements. But the real, if we think back to some of the drivers of sustainability from the past, it's really been from the investment community. In historic days, it's been either investment firms and or individual investors that are driving the activity to tell the ESG story, to make investments in it. And this was a survey that was recently published by Morgan Stanley that really shows investor interest, individual investors like us on the phone today. And 90% of investors say they're still interested in sustainable investing. Now, yes, that's the very interested and the somewhat interested, but it is still a fairly significant point of investors who are saying, I pay attention to this and I think it's meaningful. And the survey also indicated that a majority of these investors believe that they're not making a trade-off. They don't have to give up solid financial returns for the sake of having a business that cares about sustainability. So I think this really puts a nice spin that even if the government isn't asking, there still are some other constituents. So this was the individual investor. What's going to happen in the investment community, the institutional investors, I think really remains to be seen. There's a lot of speculation. This data is from Morningstar, who put out a survey earlier this year. I'm actually surprised how many different academic institutions and research organizations and these business advisories are already looking at what's taking place since the Trump administrations. But the predictions you can see from the chart that's on the right, that ESG funds did continue to increase in Q3, Q4 of last year, starting to decline now a little bit. And the prediction is that the number of sustainability funds in the US is going to decline this year. And they've already seen that a little bit of outflow already in Q1. European sustainability funds will also decline. Now, this one has a special little a little caveat to it, in that there's new legislation that went into effect in Europe where they cannot call themselves green funds without actually hitting some specific criteria. So there's a renaming that is taking place that's going to impact the number of funds because of this new reporting requirement. But it's similar, as was pointed out in the last portion, where we're seeing some more liberal political parties. There's actually some estimates that sustainability in the rest of the world will continue to increase in some of the other markets. So the UK, Australia were ones that I read about. And then the bond market, where there are green bonds, that's actually supposed to be flat for the year. So I think there's some mixed results. And if you look at this chart with the billions of dollars invested in sustainable funds, $3 billion-ish, that's a big number. So even with the Trump administration, that's not going to go away quickly. That took years and years to build up, and it will take time to, if it should, which I don't believe, go away, it will still take time to do that. So I think there's still going to be support. There's still going to be shareholders that are interested in this. Many shareholders, you've probably read studies yourself, believe that sustainability is a great way to be proactive about managing risk. And so I think that's a fundamental driver, as these funds and these investment houses are using sustainability to help manage their portfolios. So if we think about what does that mean for corporate sustainability people like me, and maybe that's you on the phone as all, what should we be doing this year? And I love this quote that was also in that same article from the Harvard Business Review. The question is not whether sustainability will matter again, but whether your organization is ready when it does. So that's how I'm approaching this. I think we need to be thinking about what's next. It was mentioned that the CSRD, the European Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directives, was pushed out for 2 years, but for now, it's just pushed out. This is a great time to be planning ahead for that. California will be going into effect next year. We can be planning for that. So some of the very specific things that you can be thinking about, 5 items to consider: conduct a risk materiality assessment with your stakeholders. CSRD requires a double materiality. So not only is it a financial risk to your business, but do you have an impact on the external environment, whether it's the actual environment or the social area or a governance aspect. So you could do a whole series on doing a double materiality assessment, but consider that. How is your business impacted by climate change? This is something you should be thinking about. We've looked at this from, what is actually temperature change going to do to our largest manufacturing facilities? What does it mean for breaks that we need to provide? What does it mean for energy demand, et cetera? But understand those. There's something called a scenario analysis, which is sort of baked into the California regulation and also into the CSRD. So are you thinking about how climate change in the next 5, 10, 15 years is going to impact your business? Climate change adaptation. I think there was a shift. There was, for years, companies wanted to focus on climate change mitigation, changing it. But my perspective and what we do at Brunswick is really focusing on how do we adapt to minimize the impact for our business, and how do we do that in ways that tie to business value. One great example, again, thinking about what climate change and weather increases are actually going to do to our electric bill. Electricity is going to continue to increase in cost, and especially with the AI demand that's going to be coming on and those data centers. So what can you be doing now to minimize your energy needs, your electric needs, to improve efficiencies? Those are things that are tied to value, that if you're getting value, nobody is going to push back on that. So those are things you can do now. Also thinking to the future, California does have some aspects around auditability verification, as does CSRD. this is a good time to, while you're not under pressure, be thinking about your control environment for data. How are you preparing to make sure your data is reliable, that you could get that third-party insurance, and that you have similar systems as you would for your financial reporting? And then finally, I just encourage you to be thinking about frameworks that are out there that are existing. The TCFD framework is one that California is built around. The CSRD is around a separate framework, but use those as a reference to think about how you want to communicate your story, how you want to address and manage risk. These are very tangible things that can also help you, if you do that with the right process and the right intention, help you understand and create value for your business. So that's just some very quick advice to be thinking about and some helpful tips. And I will turn it back over to Jessie to see if we have more questions.
Great. Thank you so much. It's yeah, it's somewhat helpful to see some of the data, right, behind that, just to see, like, it is kind of a slow a slow lever. And you know, just from the position that I sit in, right, I mean, it makes sense that a lot of businesses that are members of us come to sustainability, you know, from a values perspective. Those companies certainly are not changing what they're doing. Those who are coming to it a little bit more from supply chain pressure or, you know, reporting needs, you know, they're kind of in this limbo phase, kind of wait and see, much like Judah had said, kind of we're still in the beginning phases of seeing all of this play out. So yeah, just thanks for all this great information. Two quick comments I wanted to just kind of plug for ourselves is just a reminder that the Green Masters program uses double materiality. So just as a starting point, it's a really great starting point. And yeah, we can share more resources and tools around that. And then also in collaboration with our conference this year, we're going to do an energy forum, kind of talking about regional energy trends and what that means for businesses and how they can prepare from a like resilience lens and thinking about just you know, security and availability and affordability of energy. So just wanted to mention that as well. We do have about 8 minutes left. If anyone has any particular questions, please feel free. You can raise your hand or put those in the chat. I just, you know, Jennifer, I'm kind of curious if you'll indulge us a little bit and just maybe share a little bit about some of the kind of corporate conversations that you're having in terms of response to all of this. You know, is it, you know, just any sentiments kind of, you know, generally that you're hearing from your position?
Sure. I think the one that came out earliest was around DEI. We talked about that. And overall, I think many companies during proxy season dialed back their conversations that were in the proxy related to sustainability. I'm curious to see when the sustainability reports start coming out. Just another fun fact, April was the largest month for sustainability reports to be filed. So we're starting to see the first of what's being shared. And I'm seeing a mixed bag on DEI disclosures. Some seem to be the same. Some seem to be pulling back a little bit of the like reporting by gender and race and management level. So, but I think that's the one that really had the biggest impact. In terms of the environmental side, I think it's still playing out. So we're waiting to see what is going to happen to the IRA, and is that going to impact some of the investments that we were making that were being supported. So I think we're still in a kind of wait and see on the environmental piece right now.
Yeah. Yeah, great. I see Erin is asking a question. I'm curious if you're seeing more conversations from dealers, customers, stakeholders around Brunswick sustainability efforts and how it's impacted the industry from a competitive advantage.
Oh, thank you. Hey, Erin, how you doing?
Yeah.
You know, for us specifically, it primarily comes from the rest of the world. So the European, even some in Australia and South Africa, for example. So that is the primary focus where we see it. In the US, I think in the marine industry, the philosophy is really around they want to know that the company that they're working with is doing the right things, but the push for sustainable products, at least in marine, is not quite as heavy in the United States as it is in, say, Europe. But thank you for the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, good question. Judah, I had a question for you, and maybe any of you could answer this. It was just a little clarity around the SEC ruling. If you could just speak to, I know you said something along the lines of they had said in March that they would no longer defend the rule. And I was just looking for a little clarity on what that meant from like a legality standpoint, if you have any insight on that. I think yeah, there you are.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. So previously the rules had been challenged, basically since before they were even introduced last year. And so by no longer defending the ruling, they're essentially allowing for the rules had never gone into effect because they'd been stayed due to the defending the rules.
Okay.
So they will never go into effect. While they'll still need to let that the challenge process run its course. So it might be a while before they're formally withdrawn, but they won't go into effect. So there won't be any compliance requirements with them.
Okay.
It's like they never existed.
Okay. So there's no like guidance or anything around it. It's just kind of like you said, it's like they never existed.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. I know we get a lot of questions about that, so I just wanted to make sure I understood. Any other questions for our panelists today? Well, great. Well, thank you all so much for your time and for all this great information. We'll give you back a few minutes so that you can have some transition time. I will be sharing out the recording of this so you can look for that. And otherwise, again, thank you to Judah, Jennifer, and Tess. Appreciate your time and expertise. And we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thanks all.
All right. Thank you.